A Samaritan woman woke up laying next to a man in bed she was not married to. Today would be a day like some of the other days when she would have tasks to fulfill. Among them would be drawing water from the well. And as she reflected on her life and the fact that it had not turned out the way she would have wanted. 5 times she had been married. And 5 times men had divorced her, because in Jewish society, a woman could not do that. 5 times she had been told by a man she had once thought she felt feelings for and had cared about and had hoped that this time it might be different. You're no good. I don't want you. Get your things and get out of here. What the other people said about you is true. And then another relationship and another relationship that has failed. No young girl ever grows up thinking that that is what her future will look like. Desperate to survive in a society that makes life very difficult for unmarried women, she is now sharing the bed of a man who doesn't even dignify her with his last name. She thinks about what that day is going to be like and the fact that she's got to go to that well. They have to have some water. And then she thinks, well, I'll just go at noon, when likely no one else will be there because it's the hottest time of the day. And I won't have to explain again. There won't be the awkward looks. I won't have to answer the awkward question by someone who may even be a well-meaning person but doesn't even know how to frame a question. That I'll just make myself invisible again. That noon, as she heads towards this well, she's thinking about something she had no doubt encountered or learned, we would assume, as a young girl in the Samaritan religion and faith. And she had this one thought. There's this one thought that gave her a spark of hope in her otherwise disappointing, difficult, and painful life. And that was, perhaps one day, God would send a Messiah. Despite everything she'd gone through, it had not killed that religious spark that still burned within her. And as she looks up, it's noon, but there's someone there at the well. What makes this really unusual is this, you could tell by his clothes, this is a Jewish man. They normally avoid Samaria. Everybody knows that. And he's sitting there waiting, like he's waiting for her to arrive. And as she draws closer, she notices that he's about ready to open his mouth and speak to her. Meanwhile, the disciples are in town. Now, the disciples have been sent on a mission. And the mission is to get some food. It's a mission that I can fully agree with because I love food, right? I carry it right here with the evidence of this, right? So they're in town. Now, you got to imagine these Jewish men, 12 of them in this Samaritan village, and the whole thing is really rather weird. Because they have made the trip from Galilee, that's where they live, down to Jerusalem for Passover and other religious festivals their whole lives. But they'd never gone through Samaria, chances are. They'd gone the long way around. But now they're following this Jesus, and the thing about Jesus is when you follow him, he does some surprising things, and he'll take you to surprising places, and sometimes it's just downright awkward. And there they are in town trying to not create a disturbance. I mean, they know that not long before this, a group of religious Jewish pilgrims from Galilee had been late to get down to Passover, decided to cut through Samaria, and never made it out alive. Two of this group, they had some fiery temper. Jesus would refer to them later, he would call them sons of thunder. Because on one occasion, when a Samaritan village did not respond to Jesus like they thought they should have, they wanted Jesus to call down judgment on those Samaritans. And so here are these two fiery brothers, James and John, and John must have been there. He writes the story we're preaching from this morning. And they're just trying to be on their best behavior and not look at someone the wrong way, not say the wrong thing, and it's just weird, it's awkward, it's difficult, and buy the food that they need. And so they finally are able to purchase this food. So as they're heading back to the Samaritan well where they're going to meet up with Jesus, they're probably thinking to themselves, not a bad day. After all, our needs are going to be met. It's another good day. We get to hang out with Jesus, whom they love and they want to follow and they want to be like. Because that's what disciples are. People who want to follow Jesus and be like him. And then they get to the well and they're shocked. They're shocked at what they see. There's Jesus. He's talking to a Samaritan woman. This is really weird. Now, it's at this point that the text that Professor Phillips read picks up the story in verse 27 of John 4. And what it tells us is they thought the whole thing was really awkward. They were like having questions, but questions they never verbally expressed. Questions that were just running through their mind. Like, what in the world's going on here? This is just way weird. Now, if you grow up in church, you know that there are some thoughts are better not expressed, right? You can have the thoughts, you can say, this is weird, this is strange, I don't like what's going on, but you learn to not say it. My mother used to tell me, you never regret what you didn't say. Yeah, that is so true. So they're not saying anything, they're just thinking it. They're seeing a Samaritan woman. They can tell by her clothes, and they're seeing Jesus interacting with her, and it's just the whole thing is so weird and awkward. And meanwhile, the Samaritan woman who's been engaging with Jesus in this conversation, she can sense everything changed. She now has 12 Jewish men staring at her. She could tell that the atmosphere that had been created from this rather remarkable, even heart-opening conversation that she's had with this Jewish rabbi is now really kind of drawing to a conclusion. And so she just, recognizing the awkwardness of the moment and not really wanting attention, drawn to herself, gets up and leaves. The disciples are probably like, well, good, got rid of her. Now we can get on and save Jesus from this awkward place. I mean, what will people say about this, you know? And now we can have our meal with Jesus, and Jesus, no doubt, is going to be very happy with us because we got food for him too. We can all eat together and hang out with Jesus, and our good day can just get a lot better. And then Jesus shocks them again because Jesus just keeps doing that. He's not interested in the food. He's not interested in the success of their shopping, grocery store shopping. He says to them, I have a food you don't even know about. Now understand the disciples. They love Jesus. Jesus loves the disciples. The disciples are called to ministry. And Jesus can see into the future, and he understands the potential and what he has planned for this group of disciples to do, which is to preach the gospel to the world. And he says to them in this moment, you don't really understand me if you don't understand what drives me. The disciples knew Jesus. But they needed to have another encounter with Jesus where they would get to know him better. When you're in a conversation with someone and you're thinking this friendship, could it be a deeper friendship? And you decide to disclose something about yourself, something that's you're passionate about, something that is like, this is what drives me. And then the other person goes, what are we having for lunch? Well, how do you feel in that moment? Like, that relationship's not going further. Jesus is saying to his disciples, if you can't understand what drives me, what gets me up, what pushes me, I have to do the will of the Father. I got to finish his work. Words you will repeat when he hangs on a cross. If you really want to know me, if you really want to be like me, if you really want to follow me, you got to understand what makes me tick, what drives me. I have to do the will of the Father. And then he says to them, they've just been in this town. They've bought food. They had a successful mission. Their needs are met. They're having a good day. They're doing good things. Nothing bad, nothing wrong. Then he says to these disciples, you need to open your eyes, because when you're in that town and you did all those other activities, you didn't evangelize anybody. I just spent the whole time you're in that town talking to a Samaritan. Do you understand what drives me? He says, you have this saying, 4 more months, and then the harvest. Right? That's the gap between the planting of the seeds and the gathering of the harvest. That's a natural way to sort of look at it. He says, but sometimes you harvest where you didn't plant seeds. But if you're going to understand that now can be the day of the harvest, you have to, in verse 35 of John 4, open your eyes. Don't say someday we're going to evangelize, someday when our lives will be changed and we'll do this stuff. He says today, now, open your eyes so you can see the harvest. Now, what I want to talk about today in this kind of, someone asked me, is this a narrative sermon? Just about everything I preach sort of is in a way, but no, it's got 3 points to it. But what I want us to do is I want us to look at how Jesus interacts with the Samaritan woman to see if we can pick up what he's doing that the disciples need to do so their eyes can be opened. Because that's what Jesus wanted to do in the lives of his disciples that day, and that's what he wants to do in your life this morning. That's his intention. So, what would we note about Jesus that would help us to understand how to open our eyes? The first thing I would say is that he lived his life with intentionality. He lived his life with intentionality. In John chapter 4, in the first couple of verses of John 4, it said that he must go. He needed to go through Samaria. And then when you get to the end of the story, and you can always tell what the main idea of the story is, because at the end, the dialogue, particularly if Jesus is the main character in the story, the things he's saying or teaching, that's the impetus, that's the drive, that's the thing that you need to grasp about the story. And so he's linking up with, I had to go through Samaria, with, I have to do the will of the Father. It's an inclusio. It's how you begin and end the story. So you grasp the big idea. And the reason the disciples don't see the harvest, their eyes are not open, they're living with their eyes wide shut, is they don't have the same intentionality when they go about their lives. Now, if you told them we're going to have evangelistic service or something like that, they would have been ready for that. But just every day, like going to Market Basket, they didn't live their lives with that same kind of intentionality. The other day, I was out eating with our beloved president, Shuttlesworth. And as you know, he's an evangelist through and through, right? And so we're sitting down at the restaurant, and I'm excited. He's just great to talk to. He's an incredible man of God, someone I deeply, deeply respect. And you're just a little nervous because, he is president. And I'm looking at the menu, right? I'm trying to figure out now, what am I going to say? And I'm going to make sure, I think it was a Mexican restaurant, so I want to pronounce it correctly. You don't do anything stupid, in front of someone you really respect like that. And I'm looking at the menu, and I'm studying this menu, and I suddenly look up. He's talking to the waitress about Jesus. He's not just an evangelist when he steps onto a stage in front of a stadium filled with people. It's just who he is. He's driven by it. And I thought we were in the restaurant to eat food. Well, we were. Sure. He got a meal. But he was there with a different purpose. Like the disciples, I was having another good day, because my needs were going to be met. I do like to eat. I mentioned that before. A little bit too much, right? But he was there, yes, to get his needs met, to eat food, but he had a food that I didn't even understand. You have to live your life with intentionality, or you will go to Market Basket, or you'll go to the places where you engage with people on a daily basis in the community and just never even notice the opportunities that are all around us. That doesn't mean you have to grab the first person you see and by the collar and shake them and, you got to get saved today. But just be aware. Open our eyes. And you open your eyes when you live your life with intentionality. The second thing we see here in the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman is that he saw her for who she really was. If we're going to open our eyes, then we need to see people the way Jesus sees them. He looked at her. He didn't see a Samaritan woman with a checkered past. He knew all about that, of course. He could see a woman coming, probably demurely, maybe her head down, tired, exhausted from life and the day and everything else that she's faced with, trying to make herself small, trying to not be noticed. And he begins to speak to this woman. He doesn't care she's Samaritan. He doesn't care. It's not that she's living with someone she's not married to. It's not. He's there. He sees her for who she is. He realizes she is thirsty. I see someone, Market Basket. I'll just keep picking on that. I'm trying to get the coffee creamer my wife likes, and because it's on the shopping list. I'm there with a mission, and it's actually pretty important, actually, to make sure that the wife, it has to be the right one, No, you got the one that doesn't have sugar. I can't drink that, I'm nervous. I'm trying to get, and there's this woman there, and I'm like, it's a lot of pressure, isn't it? Yeah, it's a married man, understands that, right? So I'm there, and I'm like, why is her hair color like an unnatural color? A woman's next to me in the store, like, what? And then I'm like, how many piercings does she, wait, I'm trying to count them, kind of, as I'm like, what's wrong with this woman? And so when I look at her, and I'm trying to not look at her in a way that she's, it's awkward, kind of, because we're kind of closer than I really wanted to be, but I have to get the coffee creamer. It's actually important, And what I saw was an angry woman. That's not what Jesus saw. I see people according to the way my mind labels them. I see them through my prejudicial eyes. I see them for the way culture has taught me to look at people. That's all the disciples could see when they looked at her. That she's a woman, she's a Samaritan. Jesus saw people for who they are. Listen, if these disciples are going to reach the world, Acts 1:8, when the power of the Holy Spirit comes on you, you will be, not might be, not should be, hopefully you will be my disciples. And it's going to start in Jerusalem. It's going to spread to Judea. And then where is it going to go? Samaria, this group. You're going to be back here. You've got to get past your prejudices. You've got to get past the way you look at people based on their physical appearance. You've got to get past your own personal experience so that might cause you to want to reject somebody because of the way they're dressed, not well enough or too well dressed and must think they're better than me. Or because their skin color or whatever else, culture, background. You can't reach the world with people like this unless their eyes get opened. You gotta open your eyes. I got plans. I got a world that needs to be reached. I want to use you to do it. But you got to open your eyes. So I was in the cafeteria. And I was having lunch with a student. This is many years ago. And a young lady comes walking by, and he talks to her for a brief moment, and then just, oh, you're so beautiful. I'm like, that is kind of weird, you know? I'm a college professor, and you're saying she's like, and then I say to myself, he has no business saying that. Because you see, this student of mine was blind. I said, how can he say that? He doesn't even know what she looks like. And then I realized he'd been listening to her. He was responding to who she had revealed she was through her words. He saw her for who she was, and I saw her and judged her by what she looked like. And she didn't measure up to my expectations of beauty. But he saw her for who she was. And I thought to myself, oh God, open my eyes so I can see like he does. I mean, maybe we close our eyes when we pray because we see better that way. Undistracted by what I'm looking at and how I'm labeling people, how I'm passing judgments on them. God, forgive me, I don't want to just see an angry woman. I want to see a thirsty woman. God, help me to see people, Jesus, the way you see people. So I don't just have awkward moments like the disciples, but I have moments that bring life and life-quenching water into their souls. So Jesus is having this conversation with this woman at the well. I love the way he starts it off. He just asks her for help. Like, here's a woman who's beat up by life. Here's a woman who's had men reject her over and over again. Here's a woman who no doubt feels like her life she's worthless. Trying to make herself invisible and not even be seen. And he's saying to her, he's thirsty. Like, wait a minute, the Son of God? No, John specifically says there in chapter 4, Jesus was thirsty. He was tired, I think is the actual word, tired from the long journey. See, the Son of God is making himself vulnerable to connect with someone who feels they have nothing to offer. And he says, can you help me? You have something of value. It's a simple task. But I see you as someone of value, and you can do something meaningful for this creator of the universe who's tired in this moment and making himself vulnerable to connect with a thirsty woman. Can you get me something to drink? You're Jewish. You're male. I'm female. Like, stating the obvious. What are we having a conversation for, she says. Like, it's just stunning to her. And then they just keep on talking, and as they do, she starts sharing more and more about herself. And at one point, Jesus even says, like, go call your husband. And she gives a technically accurate answer, right? That's what people do sometimes when you're evangelizing with them and you're talking to them. And it's like, I don't have a husband. Okay, that's the right answer, but you've had 5. And all of a sudden she realizes this guy can just see right through me. He knows me, but she senses that there's a deep love in the eyes and in the voice and the way that Jesus is responding to her. And as they go through this conversation, she starts to bring up the fact that there's rival temples. And there used to be a temple not far from here, a place called Mount Gerizim, a Samaritan temple. And your king, his name was John Hyrcanus, in the intertestamental period, a Jewish king in 135, had led an army up there and destroyed the temple that the Samaritans built because the Jews didn't want a rival temple. It just seemed wrong to them. They saw the Samaritans as kind of heretics and mixed breed and all the rest of that. And so she starts bringing up the history of the location and the past and the enmity, and there's some injustice that's gone on and everything else. And so where are we supposed to worship? You tell me, you Jewish man, right? And Jesus says, listen, the day is coming. We're going to worship in spirit and in truth. And in his answer, he also says that the Messiah comes through the Jews, Jerusalem. He's saying there's a historical place where God revealed himself. It's not as though everyone somehow has the truth as long as you believe it enough. It's not as though all roads will lead to the same place. People sometimes start to slip into that in a moment of evangelism. He knows it's a painful topic for her because of what's happened in the past to her people. But he still says it's through Jerusalem and the Jews that the truth will come. However, having said that, he says everyone can worship in spirit and in truth. And the Samaritan woman understood in that moment that meant her. He was inviting her to be a part of a truth that came through a particular place and through a particular group of people. It's not the coexist bumper sticker we see on the back of cars sometimes. It's not that. It's truth. There is truth. But one day you will worship, everyone will worship in spirit and in truth, not just in spirit. And at this moment she senses there's an invitation here. There's an invitation to her to be a participant in this. And then she says, there's something I've always kind of believed. I've always kind of held on to. One day, Messiah is going to come. And then Jesus says the stunning words, I am he. I say stunning because he's not revealed that to anyone else yet in the Gospels. He's not even revealed that to the disciples yet. He's just drawing to a conclusion the longest conversation that he's had with any one individual in the Gospels is this conversation with a Samaritan woman about theology. John's gospel is written as a way of inviting us to know Jesus by entering into relationship with him. When the disciples first meet John at the beginning of John's gospel, they say, where do you live? He says, come and see. In other words, Jesus is saying, come hang out with me. You'll get to know who I am. And all of John's gospels is a series of conversations. People are hanging out with Jesus and being changed by the encounter. But this, of all the stories with one individual, not a group, but with one individual, is the longest story in the Gospels. It's with this Samaritan woman. 2 chapters earlier, John chapter 2, miracles have been done in Jerusalem, but Jesus says he would not entrust himself to anyone because he knew it was in their hearts. They weren't ready. When the disciples start to get the idea of who the Messiah is, he says, now that you're getting this grasping, this idea of Messiah, don't tell anybody. Huh? Yeah. Now that you know the Messiah, don't tell anybody. Why does he say don't tell anybody? Why does he insist on the messianic secret? Because he knows they're not really ready because they don't fully understand him yet. Because they're still thinking best seats in the coming kingdom. They're still thinking something is going to be about Israel. And there's concepts of kingdom is still largely shaped by the ideas of man or cultural ideas that are still permeating their minds. And so when he sees this woman and he says, I am he does not tell her not to tell anyone. In fact, she's going to go tell everybody. I've met the Messiah. The disciples don't even know this yet. They're cluelessly there because they still think it's about food, right? They got an agenda, and it's a good agenda, but it's not the same thing that drives Jesus. And they don't see people the way Jesus sees people. And so when this woman leaves, because that's when the disciples show up and interrupt the conversation with Jesus. It's like that incredible moment when he says, I am he. And then the awkward moment in verse 27 of John 4 when the disciples are thinking all kinds of thoughts and not saying anything, but the awkwardness, and the woman leaves. Jesus then turns to his disciples and he says, don't say 4 more months and then the harvest. Open your eyes. Here's the third insight about Jesus in this story of the Samaritan woman, and that is that people are closer to the kingdom than you think. They're more ready than we might realize. To look at the Samaritan woman, you would think she's far from God, but the reality is she's hungering and harboring something inside, a desire, a thirst that is driving her. She's closer to the kingdom. People are more, yes, there will be some who will reject you. Yes, there will be people who will laugh at you. You shake off the dust of your feet and go on to the next location. But people that you meet, when you open your eyes, are closer than you think. They're more ready than you realize. Don't say 4 more months in the harvest. Don't say someday. He says today, now. Open your eyes and recognize the harvest. As he's saying this to his disciples, the Samaritan woman is walking back towards Jesus, but this time not alone. She has a Samaritan village with her. The same people that the disciples probably had rubbed shoulders with just a few hours earlier in their efforts to purchase food without offending anyone. The same people that the disciples had looked at and thought, there's no way these people would want to hear. And as Jesus is describing his words to the disciples, he's like, look, the fields, they're white unto harvest. Here they're coming. The very people that you didn't think were ready are streaming back to find out who Jesus is. And so, my prayer this morning is that you hear the words of Jesus spoken to these disciples, spoken to your heart, into your life. His desire, he loves his disciples. He wants them to have an encounter with him, however, that will help them to know him even better. And he wants to open their eyes. He wants to open your eyes. He wants to challenge you to live your life with intentionality. He wants to challenge you to live your life looking at people the way Jesus looks at people. He wants to challenge you to open your eyes to recognize today, now, the fields are white unto harvest. People are much closer than you think. Just no one's talking to them. No one's seeing them. And this morning, he wants to speak into your heart to say, I want to open your eyes. The worship team would come back up. And we're going to conclude with a worship song this morning. And as we sing this song this morning, I want us to make this song a song of confession to Christ, a song of recognizing the cross, the blood, it still is for today, and recognizing and committing ourselves to saying, Jesus, please open my eyes that I will be a more effective evangelist.